raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to provide is true and accurate?
I do.
Thank you. Mr. Jorde?
Thank you. Will you please state your name?
Kathy Carter.
And Ms. Carter, are you an owner or have interest in property that is targeted by Summit's proposed hazardous pipeline?
Yes, I do.
And what county is that?
Floyd County.
And ma'am, have you caused to be filed in this action what is known as pre-filed written testimony?
I have.
And did that include also a series of exhibits as well as a hearing exhibit?
Yes.
And if we were to walk through the question and answer, the written questions and answers again with you here today, would the answers you provide, other than perhaps a spelling error or word error, would they be materially or substantially the same as they were in your written testimony?
Essentially, with some additional information because of those additional exhibits.
Ms. Carter, I'm sorry. They're having a hard time hearing you on the live stream. Can you move it around wherever you like?
Really loud.
You're fine.
And so the hearing exhibit, you're saying that hearing exhibit has information that corrects, modifies some of your prior testimony, is that right?
It could shed some additional light on the information, yes.
Okay. And could we look at Exhibit 316, please? And while we're doing that, I would offer Exhibit 315 and Exhibit 316.
Are there objections?
There's no objection to the pre-filed testimony. I'm just scanning these 51 pages briefly. No objection.
Seeing no objections, the board will admit, give it the way due.
Thank you. And ma'am, up on the screen here is Exhibit 316, your hearing exhibits. I don't want to go through every single page, but can you summarize generally the important parts of these documents to focus on that you believe correct your or make more specific your prior testimony?
This particular map was the original provided at the first public meeting, the county required public meeting, or state required per county. The additional exhibits are additional maps showing floodplains, showing relations to other areas.
Oh, okay, and so from your written testimony where some of that was described, this pictorial description is more accurate or more gives a better view of it. Was that the idea?
Well, this was the first map, no measurements. There wasn't much information on this map.
Okay.
Not at all.
Do you believe where the potential route is shown on your land in the north there in red, is that, to your understanding, the same route as it is today?
In the general area, yes.
General area, okay. All right, and then again, without going through all of these necessarily, does anything else stand out that the board should particularly be aware of that's different from your previous testimony?
I don't believe so, because I've mentioned the structure that we have on that. And I think in the discussion on coming up, it'll be clear where that building is and some other information. So.
All right, yeah, very good. I can't even see a building right now, but what I'm going to do, ma'am, is I'm going to let some of the other folks ask you some questions, okay?
Yes.
Tender the witness.
Questions from the parties? Mr. Taylor?
Thank you. Let's go to the KMZ. So does this show your property as you understand what the Summit project proposes to do?
That is my property. On that, it looks like the pipeline actually has changed from the previous map.
How so?
Well, it looks like it's farther south. Every map that I received from Summit has a different scale to it. So it's been kind of a piecemeal process putting this together and figuring out just where on my land it's going to be.
So have you had discussions with Summit agents where you got these different maps?
I've had discussions with the land acquisition agent and also with an engineer. I've had a couple of phone calls, conversations with him.
Okay. And did you discuss with them the route of the pipeline and the impact on your property?
Oh, yes.
So what exactly did you discuss with them?
It's really hard to tell from the shading on this map how wooded that area is. It was originally permanent pasture. I grew up in the house across the road to the north where you see that looped driveway.
Yes.
That was my home. That's where I grew up. That's where my parents lived for 50 years before moving from this house with 4 sets of stairs to a townhouse in Mason City. 50 years. And most of the other outbuildings are gone now, but the house is still there.
Does someone live there?
Someone lives there, and my husband, who is a hunter, has a rangefinder, and we determined from, well, July 8th, the date stands out in my mind. My neighbor, the property to the west of me, was part of our original farm. There's another owner to that cropland. He called me the morning of July 8th. I was actually on my way to a meeting down here. I was halfway here, and he called and he said, Summit is here. They want to bore on my property, but he already had corn, standing corn in there. And he says, can they come across your ground to bore? And I said, absolutely not. So when my husband and I figured out where that borehole was, he took his rangefinder and we figured it was approximately 550 feet from the house where I grew up on the north side of the road. So that family is subjected to being that close.
You mentioned boreholes. Was that the survey that's provided in the Iowa Code?
I have no idea what it was for. It was it's been at least a year and a half since I was told they were doing surveys. What this boring was all about, I don't know. I talked to the guy that owns that property afterwards, and I said, do you know why? He said no. I said, do you know how deep? And he said no.
Did you ever get a notice that someone wanted to survey your property?
That brings up a really interesting point. When they were sending out, let me back up just a little bit with the timeline. Last week, September 20th, 2 years prior to that, on that date, was the public informational meeting for Cerro Gordo County and for Floyd County. Logistically, I was closer. Time-wise, it was better. I went to the Cerro Gordo meeting. Mr. Burns was there at that one because all 3 of the IUB members were present, as well as a number of Summit people. That was where I got that first map that showed up. After that, they said, the land acquisition agents could begin to approach you and that they would be sending out survey notices. I didn't know that at the time. We were all caught very much by surprise by all of this. The original mailing, the public meeting, it was all very, very new. When the survey notice showed up, it wasn't prepared right. Code says there's supposed to be restricted certified delivery. Summit sent out, I don't know how many of those mailings, because I as I'm talking with other landowners, I find out they're getting something called registered certified. That's what it said on the inside letter. But that's not what it said on the envelope. They didn't have, first of all, there is no such thing as registered certified. That's two different mail services, two completely different services. Restricted delivery is a special service within each of those. And the mailings that Summit sent out were incorrectly prepared and had the incorrect amount of postage on them. So from day one, I have not believed that this is a credible outfit. They can't even get the original mailings right. The survey notice at that time, when it did come, I didn't realize that I could say to them, I don't want, talk to my lawyer, talk to the sheriff, whatever, you don't need to be on my land. I thought I had no choice in allowing them to survey. In phone conversations with the land agent and with this Micah Morris and a Lauren Peterson, I had a phone call received from him informing me about surveys.
Do they all work for Summit?
They all are Summit people, or contractor. And each one of them is telling me that there's certain surveys, and for each one of them, I said, I want to be notified, because I do not live directly on the property. I do not have 24/7 eyes on, and I want to be there. I want to know what they're doing, when they're doing it. Not once did I know when a surveyor was out there. So in the end, long answer to that question, I have no idea what surveys got done or when.
But did you talk to any Summit or agents or representatives about different routes across your property?
It wouldn't make any difference because they're bisecting it east to west. All they could do is move it a little bit north or a little bit south. They're still crashing through my property. That property is heavily timbered. One of my major concerns since day one has been preservation of my timber. Not that it's of any particular value, but it's mature trees, it's wildlife habitat. The area south, well, even some north, there's kind of a crescent shape from north to kind of a bow shape here to continually south, where that pipeline is going to bisect. That is CRP area. After my dad retired from active farming, a year later he sold cattle that we had in that permanent pasture. And then he began planting trees. You can faintly see the rows of trees. There's 9 rows of trees and shrubs that, with the help of the state forester and an FFA group and a 10-year-old boy who is now my almost 50-year-old stepson, they planted all these trees down there. It's great habitat for deer, turkey, pheasant, owls. We have eagles that are nesting farther down the river.
Do you know what impact the pipeline would have on that forest area?
The CRP, it's my understanding that if they destroy the CRP, I lose my CRP contract.
And you understand that if the pipeline would go through, that the permanent easement would not have any trees on it.
Oh, that's not what Summit tells me.
Oh.
They tell me they can bore under all of that.
Oh, so they're going to bore under it?
That's what they tell me, with
Okay.
no surface disruption. What you can't tell from a map like this is the incline. This is floodplain area. And I do have, as one of my exhibits, a flood map, which shows, this is the Winnebago River. There's the bridge. In heavy rains, in spring thaw, in spring ice out, we have had water over the road, That's the lowest point, right about there. I have pictures of water over the road. All of this area, including what is CRP, and this is one reason Dad turned it into CRP, was because that area is mush in wet times. Why this person that lives to the east of the river owns this strip of property between me and the river. For the longest time, he had it in pasture, and then it became CRP, and the last couple of years he's tried to crop it. He doesn't have much luck. I don't know why he does it, but he keeps trying. But even after a heavy rain, this can be very soft ground down here. Now, there's this huge incline going from that point up to this west fence line between me and the neighbor, which, like I said before, was a part of my original farm. This is a very steep climb, and it has mature oak trees and pine trees. So Summit tells me they can come over here to the neighbor's property east of the river, which there's an incline, of course, from the river bottom area up to the point south of the neighbor's house. They will bore at an angle under the river, under me, all the way under me, and come up on the neighbor's side, on the western side of the fence.
With one single bore?
Apparently. I don't know. I don't have the details on how the boring operation works, but that has been what I've been told more than once by Summit people, is that they can bore all that way under with no surface disruption. And when I read the terminology in the easement that says a landowner cannot landscape, plant trees, whatever, across the easement, but they tell me they can bore under it with no surface disruption, I find it hard to believe. I've talked to a state forester. He says when you look at a tree, you have about that same amount of root system below ground. And with the oak trees, you have feeder roots that extend out to about 1.5 times the circumference of the drip line. So I really am skeptical that there wouldn't be any damage to trees.
You mentioned your neighbor to the east. There is a house there. Is that where that neighbor lives?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know how far that is from the pipeline route?
For his home, no, I do not know how far.
Can we measure that, please?
Objection, Your Honor.
State your objection.
I'm going to object to the continuing exercise of measuring these distances from the pipeline. The KMZ is already in the record. The staff knows how to measure distances. This particular property is one owned by a landowner that signed an easement. I don't understand the relevance of that.
Mr. Taylor?
Well, I think any residence that's close to the pipeline is significant for the board to know, and I just want to make a record on how far it is.
Okay, just check real quick. Hold on. Okay, the KMZ files are all in the record. The capability of measuring is in the record. That would make that redundant.
Can I weigh in on that? Because for appellate purposes, if it's not specifically in the record in the form of a distance in the transcript, there won't be, I don't believe the digital files go up, so the Supreme Court won't be able to do the distances. So I think it is important to get the exact distance in the transcript.
And that was my point. Mr. Jorde just said it better than I did.
I think we can measure this one. I think it's also possible the parties can find a far more efficient way to get that measurement into the record through their briefs or measuring it beforehand. But yeah, if you'd like to measure this one, we can.
Thank you. $380, is that right?
390.
90. Thank you. So, Ms. Carter, where would the nearest emergency management personnel come from if there were a rupture in the pipeline?
As I said, I do not live on that property. We do have, don't forget to mention this structure here is what we laughingly call the he shed. It's a building that we put up for my husband to use as a hunting cabin because he hunts the entirety of that property.
And for the record, that's just north of the pipeline on your property.
The latest map that I got that came in this Frederickson mailing says 271 feet. In addition, we have a cargo container on the property to store equipment for maintenance. 3 miles away in the town of Rockford is where I live. Population of about 850. Typical small town, it is all volunteer fire department, most of whom work full-time jobs or farm themselves. A few of those firefighters were at some sort of meeting where Summit told them that they didn't need special equipment in case of an emergency. They didn't think it would be necessary. And they also said that it was just the firefighters that were in attendance at that particular gathering came away with the impression that this was just like another pipeline.
And have you been provided any information from Summit about how far a plume would spread if there were a rupture?
Apparently, I am in the same category with the terrorist because no, we have not been provided any of that information. In addition, my comment about the Rockford Volunteer Fire Department, our hazmat team is in Mason City, which is about a 25-minute drive on good roads in good weather from this point. That team's district extends as far west as Emmitsburg, which is about a 2-hour drive west of Mason City. So they could be spread thin if they happen to have emergencies in a couple different directions. And as I said, that's a response time in good weather. We're in North Iowa, which a lot of us laughingly call it the tundra zone. We have blizzards, we have ice storms, we have blocked roads. We have had multiple flood events. We've had 2 100-year and 1 500-year floods in a space of 15 years, which left a lot of closed roads. So an emergency at any time could be very complicated.
Is that a concern that you have?
Absolutely. And apparently the town of Rockford being a low consequence area, and the pipeline runs just at the north edge of Rockford. Apparently we don't count for anything.
Thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Thank you, Ms. Coles.
Good morning, Ms. Carter. You've answered a lot of really great questions. You're very, very thorough. But I was wondering, you mentioned about planting all of these trees on your property. Did you have any future plans for your land that you don't feel you can go ahead with?
Wildlife preservation is mostly it. And as I indicated, there's that sharp slope to the western half of the property that runs the entire length north and south. And we want to make sure that there's trees and vegetation there for erosion purposes. We don't want the neighbor's soil washing into our ground. He doesn't want it either. So whatever we can do to maintain the cover and maintain the wildness is our plan.
I have to look at my notes. Pertaining to the boring, did you first find out that they were thinking about boring through your property from your neighbor and not Summit?
No, I had expressed concerns about my trees to the land agent. And shortly after one of those conversations, I had a phone call from Micah Morris, who is an engineer. That was I'd have to look back at my contact log. He had not been on board with Summit for very long. He actually is one of the people that came from Texas, and he said he had an engineering background, and he joined the group because the project was off the rails, to use his term. But he's the one who told me about boring at an angle and boring under the river. I have no idea how deep they would go under the river. Anytime I've inquired about that, there's been mixed answers. And he said they would continue on under my property completely and come up on the other side of the fence. And he did mention a boring hole and a fracking tank on that side of the fence to accomplish that.
Okay. Is there anything else I haven't asked that you want to bring out?
The safety is a huge concern because no matter where we go on that property, from north to south, we have to be crossing that pipeline. And it's as one of the first things I've learned after that first public informational meeting, started checking on what CO2 actually is. And one of the first things I learned was about enhanced oil recovery. And later in all of my readings and research and information gathering, I found a very lengthy list of alternate uses for CO2. There's no way they need to put this in our ground. From the starting point on the east end at Lawler, Iowa, going clear across the state to the western border, there's 250 miles of that line, and Lawler is the only plant on that line. Everything else is branched miles away.
Thank you very much, Ms. Carter.
Ms. Hyatt?
Hi, I'm Christine Hike. I'm a landowner as well. Just a couple questions. You said you have a he shed and a lot of trees. Do you have a well or you have any water usage for those areas?
We have, when we put the he shed in, there's electric power lines that run along the northern border of the property. We don't have an easement for it. They're on the north side of our east-west fence line, paralleling the gravel road. We strung electric in from that to the he shed. There's a well on the property that hasn't been used in a number of years. My husband and I have discussed checking out the well to see if it's still good and adding water to the property. And the he shed was kind of a temporary situation. At the time we put that in, we were living an hour away. He and I were married 15 years ago. He had an acreage in Hamilton County. I moved down with him. When he wanted to go hunting, he had to make this hour-long trip. So that's why we put the he shed up. So he'd have a place that he could bunk for a night or two at a time. Kind of primitive, but there's bunk beds in there. There's microwave in there. He can spend a couple of nights at a time. In the meantime, as I retired and he was nearing retirement, we had talked about at some point putting what we call a shouse. Some people call it a barndominium. We had discussed putting that on the property. And then we got this letter from Summit about this pipeline. And those plans got put on indefinite hold.
Also, you had mentioned you visited with land agents. Did they ever talk to you about eminent domain to you?
Yeah, I have notes I could fumble through to give you the date of the phone call when it was first mentioned. My land agent did say that. But then he has also said in a phone call last year that the permit would be awarded this spring, was basically what he said. Yes, eminent domain has been mentioned.
Thank you.
Mr. Leonard?
Thank you, Your Honor. Just a couple, ma'am. One, just some clarification on the drill under your property. The Winnebago River is just east of your property, is that right?
Correct.
I think you testified at some point you talked to land agents about having concern about the trees on your property.
Correct.
And then after expressing that concern, it was explained to you that Summit would then drill under the river and completely under your property as well, and then come up on your neighbor's property to the west.
With no surface disruption.
Okay. Another question, I don't know if anybody asked, that you currently have a northern natural gas transmission pipeline across your property, is that
It
true?
was signed for in 1954 by my parents.
So that's a yes, it's there.
Yes, it is there. I talked to Northern Natural Gas personnel, and they said that that pipe was max rated at 800 psi in comparison to Summit's 2100 plus psi.
And the northern natural gas pipeline is south of the proposed Summit pipeline, is that true?
Yes, and at a March 10th, 2022 meeting in Mason City, I asked 3 different Summit people about any required distances from the Northern Natural Gas, and I got 3 different answers.
How often does Northern Natural Gas access your property to do maintenance on that line?
About every other year, they come in and brush cut, clear cut across the entire easement.
And how wide is that easement?
I believe that's 50 feet.
Thank you, ma'am. I don't have any other questions.
Representative Brooks? Sorry. Shouldn't do that to somebody.
It's been a long time ago. PTSD. Ms. Carter, could you please, since we're talking about, just for the record, if we can pull up the KMZ map, if you can just use that pointer and show us on that parcel where this northern natural line is, just so that we have it in the record as to where this is being, that conversation that you just had, where this is at on the property.
Where, what is
That northern natural pipeline that we just talked, or that was just talking.
you can see the line, the cut line there.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you for that. And so just for the record purposes, I'd say it's about a third of the way down on your property from the north.
Yeah, and one of these maps and notes I have, I think it said 250 feet, and yet one of the county maps that Summit set out showing the pipeline showed a separation distance of 350 feet, so there's quite a difference.
Okay. Thank you. That's it. Thanks.
Mr. Jordan, redirect.
Yes, thank you. Can we stick on the KMZ here and zoom in? I'd like to get a distance, please, from approximately where the northern natural gas line is, if we could just zoom in a little bit more, from the proposed Summit pipeline. All right, approximately 325 feet, it looks, to maybe the northernmost boundary of a 50-foot easement. So somewhere in that range. Ms. Carter, would you agree with that?
I have another map somewhere that says 200 and something, and I forget the exact figure.
Okay.
And I can't lay my finger on it right now.
So just for rough estimates, and has Summit told you why they couldn't put their pipeline, if approved, closer to or south of the existing natural gas pipeline?
There's been no discussion on how close, or that was one of the things I asked at that March 2022 meeting of one of these 3 people that I had a discussion with. I said, can it be laid right next to Northern Natural Gas? or how far away do you have to stay from Northern Natural Gas? And as I said, I got 3 different answers. And Northern Natural Gas, when I contacted them about it, they didn't have a clue. They didn't know anything about a CO2 pipeline going through. I talked to 2 different gentlemen from Northern Natural Gas about that.
So you already deal with, at least to your testimony, kind of on a every other year basis, the folks from Northern Natural Gas cutting through there. Now, if this had to go through, would you think those 2 pipelines should be located near each other, or do you have any thoughts on that?
It would be nice if I have no choice in having CO2 pipeline, it would be nice if they were basically in that same corridor. But then I would also be concerned about what if something happens with one, it's going to happen with the other. It's going to be a double whammy. So safety is another concern.
Okay, and you indicated, I believe it was somewhere near the Northern Natural Gas, or maybe south, that you actually have eagles nesting, or maybe not today, but that historically they nest there. Is that right?
Down in the lowest part of the property.
In the lowest part of the property. And have you received copies of any surveys that would tend to prove or disprove if Summit realized that or found any such habitats?
What surveys? I don't know what surveys have been done, who did them, when, what they discovered. No idea.
Okay. So, all right. And then in terms of the eminent domain, that you said was mentioned, I think, a handful of times. Did you take that to be either an implied or overt threat that if you don't sign this, you can look forward to eminent domain?
Oh, I'm sure that that's what the land agent was trying to use as a pressure tactic. To me, I have not wanted this since day one, and I have a couple other reasons why, in addition to the safety. I told that land agent, I will have nothing to do with this, and I will never sign, ever. And he said, it could go to eminent domain. I said, it's not about the money. I have a narrow strip. I wouldn't get much for it anyway. It's not about the money. You can take me to eminent domain. I don't care. I am never signing.
Now, I think you mentioned the town of Rockford. Is that nearby?
3 miles to the east and slightly south, yes.
Okay. Does that have any significance to the line of questioning you were asked on safety?
If you follow this pipeline east, you will see where it basically borders the north edge of Rockford. It's the Rockford K through 12 school that I attended is approximately a half mile away from the pipe. And as the town sits, the northernmost residences would be close to only about a quarter of a mile away from the pipe. The Shell Rock River, another river, runs through Rockford, right through it, from northwest to southeast. One of these exhibits is a map of Rockford, including a flood map of the town. And I don't know if you can pull that up or not, but my concern is, like so many people have said, referring to the Satartia incident. It was abnormal rains. I think it was Mr. McCown, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, when he testified, he said that the Satartia incident was due to a 40-year rainfall, resulting in fluctuations of the pipe. The topography was relatively flat. As I mentioned before, this whole area, including Rockford, has had 2 100-year and 1 500-year floods, all in a space of 15 years. Now, I think that's a little more than this 40-year thing that he's referring to. And the topography sounds very similar. I have not been to Satartia, Mississippi, but Jack Willingham also said, high area here, you cross the road, and it's the start of the bayou, so it's basically flat. Compare that to the Rockford topography. You have the area that's a little higher, come down to the river, and it's basically flat from that point. If something happens at that river crossing, which here again, we've not been told how deep it will go under the shell rock when they bore under it. If something happens at Rockford, and it's going to, we know the properties of CO2 are such that it's going to follow the lowest areas, which logically, it's going to come right into the town of Rockford. We have population about 850, low consequence area. You tell those people they're low consequence. I think they disagree.
And when you say low consequence, meaning that for the federal designation, they have less than 50,000 persons, so they're not federally identified as a high consequence area.
Pretty much describes most of Iowa.
Could we zoom out? I just want to get a look at where Rockford is from here. You said, oh, right there. Yes. I see. Okay, so we're looking at Rockford, and then we've got the proposed route just north of town there. Is that what you were referencing?
Correct.
And I take it that you believe that's simply too close given the risks of this pipeline?
Absolutely.
And has Summit ever mentioned to you why this route couldn't be further north to move away from Rockford?
Objection.
Go ahead, state your objection.
This is simply direct examination at this point. There's no line of cross that this is redirecting.
Mr. Jorde.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out the conversation she had, which were discussed on cross of other people, if that was part of the nature of the conversations.
I think Sartarisha was also covered fairly extensively in the pre-filed testimony.
Okay. I guess I'd still have the same question.
In my mind,
I still have the same objection.
Yeah, what specifically is your question, and how does it relate directly to the questions in cross-examination today? And is it possible that we could probably just move on rather than have this fight all day and try to get to all of your witnesses?
Well, so she was asked questions about conversations she had with Summit persons and what was or was not discussed. And my simple question, and it's my last question, is was the proximity to Rockford and the proposed pipeline ever a topic of those discussions with Summit between Ms. Carter?
Ms. Carter, you can answer the question if you can and you would like to.
my conversations with the land agent, first of all, was that I would never sign. Second of all, why here? Get away from Rockford. 2 miles west of me, they go to the north side of the road and parallel that east-west road for at least 15 miles to on past Interstate 35. Why not take it north at this point? As I was looking at a map the other day and listening to the conversations about the Charles City Area Development Corp and knowing where that land is, they could have dropped straight south of Charles City, avoided that, and gone clear across south of me. It would be 3 to 4 miles south of me. So there's alternates.
All right. Thank you, ma'am. I don't have anything further.
Thank you, Ms. Carter. You're excused. Mr. Jorde, we typically take a break at 10. That's only 27 minutes. Do you have one you want to squeeze in there, or would you rather take a break now and then move to a longer witness?
Yeah, I couldn't promise that the next one would be 27 minutes, so
Just take a 15 now,
I
then.
think that's fine.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Who will we be going to next? Do you know?
Yep. Ann Gray with the Wilmer Holstein Trust.
And Gray. Thank you.